Hello and most welcome to 1702. It's going to be a summary of especially Paul Johnston's Wittgenstein, Rethinking the Inner, but also some pointers coming from Joachim Schulte's book. And I will begin with the inner, something that we have discussed a lot before. What role does the inner take? What is the inner's purpose? I will start with a cite from Paul Johnston's book. It's the first chapter, The Problem of the Inner. The expression, "Who knows what is going on inside him?" The interpretation of outer events as consequences of unknown or merely surmised inner ones. The interest that is focused on the inner, as if on the chemical structure from which behavior issues. For one needs only to ask, what do I care about inner events, whatever they are? To see that a different attitude is conceivable. But surely everyone will always be interested in his own inner life. Nonsense. Would I know that pain, etc., etc., was something inner if I weren't told so? This is what it all is centering on. The problem of the inner. simplified, one can say that all philosophical problems do have some connection to a misconstrued idea of a separated innerness. That something inner is the origin of everything, and that it is strictly unknown. Could even be unknowable. This has its mirroring in an outside world that share this hiddenness from understanding. So we can only indirectly or empirically know the world. In an earlier lecture, a Zoom lecture, we talked about mind reading. And that mind reading is impossible according to a lot of philosophers. You can only have a hypothesis. But you have no direct access to understanding the feelings of others. Their emotional responses. All is hidden. because the inner is also hidden. An assumption here from my point of view could be that to know oneself better could help understanding the outside better. They are interconnected. Somehow interwoven into each other, and there is no clear-cut seam where you can open the things up. And separate one from the other, so that you can have this absolute individuality of the inner, the hidden inner, that is just cause of all our intentions, thinking, doings and actions. I have earlier suggested that the cosmological fallacy, or the fallacies, likely have some connection to this misconstrual of reality. And if you go into the other scale, the very idea of transcendental worlds, like the ideas of Hugh Everett or Max Tegmark, are also deeply connected to the misunderstanding of the inner. And the sense of an original true thing, which we never can reach, that also originates in the misconstrual of innerness. Already the Greek made this mistake, or had been captivated by the picture, so to speak. And I think that is the reason for the Platonic ideal forms. It is a shadow effect of not reaching into the inner, having it closed from the beginning. Then also the outer at the very same time closes itself. And I would also say that the idea of the Ionian physikos and their arche is a search for inner, outer truth that is always beyond. Their assumptions of reality all shared beyondness. The atom could never be touched, experienced, seen, or in any way sensed. And to say that water is the building block, but in ways that are not directly experienced. It introduces a very eerie sense of beyondness or hiddenness or closedness. This to be compared to what I sometimes call technological thinking. The idea that even to know people's emotions take an empirical investigation, or that what I experience must also be subject to sort of verificationists' tools and working systems. And we have started to think that the world cannot be understood directly. So more and more these tendencies has become or have become established throughout Western culture. And we make less and less use of our own possibilities for understanding. So we stopped using our sensory awareness, if you like. That's an expression I think covers it. In the olden days, people were more acutely aware of both outer and inner. Looking at the masters and carpenters also of the Renaissance, one is shocked of their skill and accuracy. Being able to do incredible feats like the Sixtine Chapel, where Michelangelo in the end stopped using cartons to know where he was supposed to put the alfresco. He did it by skill. So that it would look accurate 20, 30 meters further down on the ground floor. That is just beyond belief. The Romans made aqueducts, and the distance of 1 kilometer had just a falling height of 30 centimeters. That makes an incredibly small angle, just sufficient for the water to be willing to flow. But how could they do it without laser and other modern tools? I think those things have a close connection to how we sort of relay everything to the inner/outer transcendental domain, obscuring understanding and knowledge. I'll go to the next chapter here to get some more stuff. Chapter 2 of Paul Johnston's book, The World of the Senses. What actually is the world of consciousness? There, I'd like to say what goes on in my mind. What's going on in it now? What I see, what I hear. Couldn't we simplify that and say, what I am now seeing? Wittgenstein's argument, writes Johnston, on privacy shows that a reassessment of our approach to the inner is necessary. However, the attempt to carry out this task clashes with some of our deepest philosophical prejudices. No doubt, I would say. There's a huge debate going on about what consciousness is. Where does it stem from? Does it emerge? Where is it situated? In the brain, or as René Descartes suggested, in the pineal gland. Why, the question seems to be, would consciousness be something other than what I see? What I feel, what I do, what I intend, what I know, and so forth. And of course that is questioning one of the greatest prejudices within science, no doubt. And I think the actions both of completely denying consciousness, as for example the view of American philosopher Daniel Dennett, and the different views of consciousness and dualism from Chalmers, Couples Churchland, and others. As I see Wittgenstein, both these camps are pretty similar. Consciousness is something other. If we do include not to exist, to be as other as anything could be. Here, if it doesn't exist. Maybe one could reformulate Chalmers' idea of consciousness as being there is a consciousness, but it is somewhere else. Maybe in some Hugh Everettian many worlds idea. We think, we perceive, we sense, we experience, we express, we go places, fall in love, fall out of love, discover Paul Johnston's book, and so forth. That is, so to speak, consciousness. And maybe in combination what I said about the previous chapter, the shine and the brilliancy of being present is hidden by our prejudice that the inner is closed off somehow. That it simply is not here, as well as the outer being situated in an unknown place in the universe. So maybe the strive for consciousness per se is driven by a felt lack of something. Not being fully present in what you're sensing, and you want something more. And therefore entrat consciousness in itself also, without, as you know, participating in the language game. It is hold at a distance, not present, not here, and then you long for it. You want to come closer to it, and you make an ontological shift. It becomes consciousness as a stain, as an existence that doesn't participate in any interaction which could make it working, functional. As I said before, without a corollary, the concepts become weakened, less telling. They lose their strength that way. No longer being able to tell their message. Attenuated. Just thinking out of the blue here, could also be that God has a similar disjunct function in modern day. Maybe we replaced the acting God in the language game, or for instance Roman times or Middle Ages, with a more transcendental existence God. That participates in the language game to a much lesser degree, I'd say. like the once more Max Tegmarkian transcendental other worlds. Maybe the appella of Wittgenstein to look for the words and concepts in their natural habitat could make words stronger, more effective, or more sensitive. Not as cut off and cold, mechanical. And I think the next chapter we mentioned thinking, but as Heidegger calls this, Danken, not thankful, denken, not thankful, but danken, and more thankful thinking could be possible if we enter the inner, so to speak. Wittgenstein uses two pictures. I will describe them carefully. One is a table tennis racket in an upward position, and then it is turned upside down. We can directly understand both the upside down and the correct one. But whereas we mirror image the cursively written word pleasure, it becomes very hard to see, perceive, sense. I would say it would be very hard to copy it as well from memory if we haven't seen pleasure the right way just before. This points to the utmost importance of familiarity. That the background, history, culture, experience, skill are all deeply entangled with what we call sense, see, understand. And this, of course, also questions an enormous presupposition within philosophy, that the world is simply out there, not connecting to our knowing about it. Our familiarity is of almost no importance. We are cast into a world from where we have no connection whatsoever. And that world has all its properties already made and out there. And we can only indirectly collect them, gather them in a basket. This is almost exactly what some philosophers have proposed. Like, for instance, James Locke. Some properties are absolutely disjunct from us, with no connection whatsoever. Which is, of course, also very true about modern ideas like empiricism of today and reductionism. I'd say Wittgenstein would rather say that reductionism is a misunderstanding of the language game. It has the idea of the secluded innerness, which makes also, as I suggested, for the hidden, secluded, secretive, outsideness that can only indirectly be perceived through empirical investigations. And there you have reductionism. which some philosophers today criticize by saying put the all things together, already unlawfully separated, and they want to put them together. I think they share the same foundational misunderstanding. Does an atom really participate? Does the word atom really participate in that way in everyday language? Or I would say even technical language? I seriously doubt it. It is used when it fits its slot, its doings, like an umbrella fits rainy weather, but not in this reified way of the atom being a thing in itself without a natural habitat or interconnectedness. Everything is at bottom ingrained in each other. And I think I put a pause there and see if we can continue. So we continue where we left off with the senses, chapter 2 in Paul Johnston's excellent introduction to the psychology of Wittgenstein. And we discussed the last bit was that knowingness, familiarity, is maybe the most important aspect of sensing perception. Our familiarity decides, so to speak, what is possible to sense, or what becomes of the sensing. Without that aspect, it becomes very little of it remains. seeing without knowing, seeing without language, and so forth. This, of course, reminds me of the philosophers, the modern philosophers of language, that often assume that words are not in their natural habitat. They do not live in the world, so to speak. They are somewhere else, depicting something in what could be called an outer world, or a world not here. This is close to ideas within mathematics, where it's assumed that numbers are otherworldly. Sometimes that is referred to as the Platonic realistic view of numbers, that they inhabit some part of transcendental world where they simply represent or depict, and both the numbers and what they depict is more or less hidden from view. And in this view, the numbers do not participate in reality. They are all similar in some odd Newtonian way. They behave like desouled words. But huge objections has come to this way way of seeing things. One is that the numbers that regulate the classical Newtonian universe are of the kind real numbers. And real numbers take up such a enormous quantity of space in the real world, this physical world, that there is no room for them in the universe. And this has become a very important objection to Platonic mathematics. And it's definitely also taking its toe on the idea of Newtonian classical physics. This objection here, or clarification of the senses, is similar. That we cannot take away our knowledge of the world, separate that from what should be only the world. So you can sort of keep the world and get rid of knowledge. They do come together in this most interwoven way, non-separable. Or even non-separable. It wouldn't be possible to separate them. can be very well compared to Bayesian mathematics, which we have taken up in this series, where one see that our knowing of the world is an inextractable part of the world. And it's of great importance. This is also called priming. And the olden theories were all connected to the idea of so-called blank slate of human beings, that we are born without any knowledge or inclination. And as Jacques Monod would have it, the French biologist or molecular biologist that received the Nobel Prize in the 60s and then wrote a book, he would have it that the less of you or of me when I do science, the better. The more clear will the objects show themselves to me. That would be, according to Joachim Schulte and Wittgenstein, based on a foundational misunderstanding of the world. We are not, or we'll better look at the words and the senses, are not disconnected from something they represent only at a huge distance. No, the interconnectedness is of enormous importance. And in quantum physics, without the instruments or our knowingness in advance, no results whatsoever would show themselves before us. It would be an absolute blank. Well, I think I'm going to rephrase that. It wouldn't be a blank. It's just a pretty deep misunderstanding and inability to understand or do things. I will stride on to the next chapter. Chapter 3. The mystery of thought. And here I just need to say that's a questioning of some of the, I think today, as most established views on the human mind, its thinking and the brain. Thinking is a mental activity. Thinking is not a bodily activity. Is thinking an activity? Well, one may tell someone, think it over. But if someone in obeying this order talks to himself or even to someone else, does he then carry out two activities? So thinking cannot really be compared to an activity at all. For one also cannot say that thinking means speaking in one's imagination. This can also be done without thinking. Yeah, how true. I think the absolute majority of us see thinking as some sort of process, an ongoing thing. A sort of biological machinery that works at a constant pace and plops out thoughts, ideas, words in a long, endless flow, and so forth. This is not how the word think is used in its natural habitat of its actual functional use, the place where it originated, the place where it was born, grew up, and is still to this very day acting. No one says, I'm constantly thinking from morning to night, and without me wanting it, ideas plop out of my mind from inside the machinery. One of the most important objections to the machine-like idea of thinking is the lightning speed of thought. Where everything comes to you in an instant. There's no passing of time. And I think that is pretty indicative of how thinking almost always is used as something instantaneous, or at least a marker. Very seldom thinking has extension in time or space in the language. You can compare it to punctuation mark. It's punctual in the language to mark something. That could be a first step in approaching a more natural way of understanding thinking. If I say I thought it over, it has an effect in that situation. It doesn't mean that my machinery has been going on for 14 hours and 52 minutes and 2 seconds. You want to say something to someone else in that instance. It wouldn't make any sense to say that it refers to the extension of time spent. And what it does actually, and this I got from an email of Paul Johnston, it makes thinking all the much more or much less mysterious, unfathomable. It becomes something that you can understand, not some weird unknown process. A process you don't even know where it's taking place and how, and the outcomes happen by themselves somehow. And once you understand this, your use of the word thinking will become more decisive. You will not be as standstill or confused in your actions. I say, speaking the word thinking is in itself an action that needs to be delivered accurately at the right point to be real, and then it will also have its very important corollary. But whereas the idea of thinking as a process dooms it to oblivion, non-understanding, it becomes completely otherworldly in some ways. I would say you enter into thinking. The words are no longer away from you. And here's one of those things that approached a stuckiness I felt very keenly myself. And if you ask somebody all of a sudden, this is, suppose for example that someone is sitting lost in thought and suddenly smiles. When we ask her why she smiled, she explains, I was just thinking how good my friends have been to me. If you ask her what happened when she had this thought, or what she experienced, she may have no particular answer other than what she already said. And here's an example. If she could answer, the answer would be really weird with images, with friends, and can you see now it doesn't really make any sense? And even if it were such a thought produced, it wouldn't contain thinking. It would be just like a photo, badly developed. Intrinsically, Johnston concludes, it is not a germ. It doesn't contain what comes out of the mouth, doesn't contain anything of those things. And this might sound like mystification, but I would say it's just the opposite. An unknown germ is not a convenient replacement. And here is a phrase from writings of Wittgenstein. Nor does something become a germ because of the later development. What remains then is that the image of the germ forces itself upon us. Quite naturally so, for we want to see the kernel of matter in the experience. And once more we have here similarities to what I call technological thinking. All machines have a kernel, a germ in them. The reason for why it was produced by the inventor, the constructor, the company. It sort of participate, and also the later user. Human beings are not constructed, at least not in that way. So the technological thinking looks in the wrong corner. It's like looking for plants in the desert. Or fish in the air. And you can imagine how taxing it is to be constantly looking in the wrong place of the world. It will bear down on your energy levels. Looking for plants in the desert takes time, and eventually you will strike upon an oasis and find some plants. But before that you will have suffered long and hard. And I think that metaphor with the desert fits with a natural habitat. You wouldn't look for a kingfisher in a dry place. What would it fish? So not only is Wittgenstein's project of ridding us to some extent of the obscurities of modern conception of language. He is also helping us to find the way. It's not very hard to see how we have got lost on the way. And how we today only have to refer to even greater or take use of even greater misunderstandings or misapplied methods like technological thinking. That would lead us dissatisfied with the result. Our predictions are most likely not to hold any results or very little. It would be almost like chancing. In a way, it's also going back to a time when you were younger, and even though your sphere of your Sprachspiel or language game was smaller, I think your command of it was greater. But of course, this confusion is ingrained in language itself. It is as almost as it lends itself to it. Healthing up the language game. And I think the process model of thought is also close to some sort of machinery. We today look at the brain scans and see, oh, that is thinking going on. And we continue to make a connection to what that person says he thinks or sees. And I can well imagine that missing out on what just was said about the person who was asked why she was smiling. If you get stuck in a misunderstanding there, you would put a terrible strain on your natural thinking. Maybe try to prematurely infuse it with words somehow, and thereby straining the source of creativity from where it stems. Letting thinking be will make way for more possibilities. Less of predictable thinking. And I think this creative thinking has in modern day become mysterious because of these tendencies. And we assume somehow, without knowing what that would mean, so just shown in the example, it simply doesn't make sense. But we assume something, And then after that came a construction of what you could call creative thinking that assumes that non-verbal or non-imagery thinking is creative. Whereas all thinking is, of course, absolutely creative and fantastic. Once you start appreciating the wonderful role of it, used correctly and then skillfully progressing, becoming better and better. Yeah, slowly approaching the time to close. But these are still things that are hard to understand, and Edward de Bono, the Maltese British creative consultant and inventor of asymmetrical thinking, he had a very good intuition of what creative thinking could be. But I would say this brings it a bit further. It brings it to the point we've been hampering thinking. We are hampering thinking. And it's the misunderstanding that does it. And trying to force creativity, well, I can see that it wouldn't work. It works when it's natural. The origin of thinking is not constricted. It would be horrible if thinking was just words and images. And how are the images to be connected, and what gives them life? Well, thinking itself does, without being a process. If we just let it be, it will bloom like a magnificent flower. And maybe this is very parallel to what Edward de Bono meant by stone logic, that being under the spell still of the captivity of the picture, being captured by the picture, the underlying image. I sternly believe that it is an image under all of it, not a not an image that would be possible to draw, but there still is an image, and you can get a sense of it. And once you have it, I think that is a big revelation. Once you see it, I was infused of that. That could be the most important step in the development to clarification. But the picture is coming, build it up little by little, and in the end it shows itself. Well, thank you very much for listening in. Have a very pleasant morning, day, afternoon or evening, wherever you are. Bye bye for now.